Okay, I will close the hearing at 7:25, and a question for both Les and Bill Belknap. Bill, do you see any issues with it as far as that alley depth and the length of it up here? I'm guessing the fire hydrant's up here somewhere, I'm guessing.
Correct. The fire hydrant's in the public right-of-way in front of 807.
Okay. The width of this alley, and I don't know, this is kind of a steep embankment kind of down here. If this 1 foot is vacated, is there issue with that being able to be developed back here? Because I have no idea what square footage of it.
So if I may, I haven't looked at the development of that individual property, but underneath the International Fire Code, fire access has a minimum width of 20 feet. And I understand that alley is currently 16 feet in width. So I don't think that currently just the alley on its own would be adequate for fire access to the rear of the property. That property also likely could not be divided off the back, the Freeland property, where they discussed the desire to divide off a portion of the southern portion of the property. Underneath the city code, all lots have to have frontage on a public street. So for a standard lot, it's a minimum frontage of at least 40 feet. For a flagpole lot, it would have to be a minimum of 20 feet. And so I do not know the distance between the westerly right-of-way line of that alley and their existing home, or whether they have property or, width on the west side of their home in order to accomplish that. But if they wanted to do a flagpole lot, they'd have to have 20 feet of their own frontage that would be tied to that rear portion, and that flagpole cannot exceed more than 150 feet in width. So I guess the two things are 150 feet in length. So I guess the two things to clarify is that that alley does not currently meet fire access, and I do not think that the fire department would likely accept that in its current width to provide access to the rear portion of the property, even in its current 16 feet in width, unless the owner made some additional width of their property available and they could provide that 20 feet in width. And they could not separate off a separate lot in the back portion of the property unless they could have a flagpole that would extend up to C Street to provide the required 20 feet of minimum frontage, or potentially receive some sort of, variance from that requirement, which I think would be very difficult to obtain.
Okay, so that is 16 feet wide right there.
The current platted width of that alley is 16 feet.
Okay, so
correct.
it has not been in compliance. Perhaps that's why it's never been built on.
Well, all those properties currently have fire access from C Street, and the fire truck could reach the majority of that property from C Street and maybe using some of the alley for personnel, but not necessarily for fire vehicles to gain that access. So they have the access that they are required to have. The question would be, if you're to develop something on the southern portion of that property, could you gain adequate fire access for the fire department to approve a new structure being placed there? And currently, underneath the fire code, that fire access has to be a minimum of 20 feet in width.
Okay. Okay, let's turn it over to the council. I just wanted to get a few of those things verified. Jim?
I have a question for Bill. If they were to divide this lot out and then provide access from down this way, the alley would not be suitable. It would have to be converted to a city street or city right-of-way?
Correct. That would not satisfy the requirement of the lot having frontage on a public street. We did pass an amendment a few years ago to exempt out a few pre-existing legal non-conforming lots that only had alley access, but that did not grant the allowance of creating new lots that only had alley access. So they would need to somehow accomplish that flagpole minimum 20 feet of frontage. It doesn't mean that they couldn't develop on the rear portion of the property. In the R3 district, you can have multiple structures on that lot, but they just couldn't separate it and divide it off as a separate lot. And they may not be able to develop on that southern portion of the property unless they can provide adequate fire access in some form.
How close is the fire access on this end?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind here is what you see in this area. This is not an alley. This is all private. So the 16-foot alley we're looking at comes from C Street and extends all the way down to this intersection with an east-west alley here. And so that is the extent of the public right-of-way within the plat. And so there's a portion of this that is being used as driveway and serving these couple of homes that is gravel today. I'm not sure that how much of that's actually in the alley right-of-way. Looks like it kind of drifts into this adjacent parcel here. So that would be the other access point, if you would, to this alley and potentially to a southern portion of this lot, where if fire service could come through here and possibly come some distance up this. I'm not as familiar with the topography down here, but I'm assuming since it's being used, it's probably not too steep as compared to, it's a pretty steep section right about in here. And so that would be the other closest point for potential fire truck access, is if they could come in here, possibly up here a little ways, and help cut that distance. Again, probably for personnel to go from the vehicle to the site, as would be the case here. You're not going to bring a vehicle down this area as it exists today.
Is the width of the alley down here, is it the same, or
It
is it
is.
wider down
No,
here?
it's 16-foot right away all the way through.
All the way through?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Bill, you mentioned that a flagpole lot can't be more than 150 feet wide, or I'm sorry, long. Do you happen to know the plot size there?
Well, the vacation request is 110 feet in length, is that correct? So that yellow line gives you the general reference, but I don't know the full length of that entire lot.
Okay.
As I recall, each of these lots, I believe, is 50 feet wide in a north-south direction, here, here, and here. And then the last one is 60, thus the 110-foot combination in that area. So that would, from that point, would be approximately another 100 feet down to what I believe is their southerly property line.
So it might
for
be
that
210
parcel.
feet in length.
Overall, about 210.
Randy?
So am I understanding correctly that currently they would not be permitted to build on the southern part of that lot, and the only way would be if that alley were to be converted to a city street at some point?
Well, to clarify, they could build on that southern portion if they could provide suitable fire access acceptable to the fire department. So there is a difference between dividing it off as a separate lot for sale or adding another structure on that existing lot. So you couldn't divide another lot off for sale unless you could somehow get that minimum 20 feet of street frontage for that lot in a flagpole configuration. If you could not achieve that, then you could place another structure on that lot. The R3 district does allow multiple structures per lot, but you could not get that another structure permitted unless a fire department approved of it and had adequate fire access to provide fire suppression services to that new structure. And right now, all we have is a 16-foot wide alley where the fire code would dictate that that access would need to be 20 feet in width. So either the fire department would have to provide an exception, or additional right-of-way would need to be obtained to have that 20-foot fire access width to serve that new structure.
And it appears that if they were to consider an exception, they may prefer the southern approach anyways. That's a possibility. if
That would be
there were
my,
to be another
that would be my
structure.
perception, that just because of the topography, that would be the only feasible approach. The difficulty you run into is you'll have a structure that will likely be addressed on C Street that is going to be gained off that rear alley. So that's where it makes it difficult, and really why lots need to have frontage on a public street. So if you're responding to an incident, that they know where they're going to and have access to that structure. But that does not mean that access necessarily has to be gained by that street. And the fire department would just have to be aware of that and have that in the response protocol.
Mr. Mayor?
Jim?
Maybe this is a question for Mr. Freeland, but does he own property on this side 20 feet wide? Would you be able to provide a 20-foot wide access, fire access on the west side of your property to that lot?
You need to answer from the podium.
Yep. Come on up, Mr. Freeland, please.
Yes, thank you for the question. No, there's a separate neighbor, and we only have about, from the house, the white roof, we have about 4 feet, perhaps, before the property line. And there's trees and shrubbery and bushes. We don't really have any
I think that's the
access.
line right there, right here, Jim.
It's right here, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Our access is on the east. We don't have any on the west.
Thank you, Mr. Freeland.
So if he wanted to separate this as a flagpole lot, he would have to acquire 20 feet of access on this side in order to make that work. Is that correct, Bill?
That would be one option, provided that there is room that could be acquired. There are setbacks that need to be required on each of
Right,
the
you have to
structures.
meet the setback
correct.
requirements. It seems like it's not much more than 20 feet there to begin with.
That's what I would estimate, there's probably not much more than that, and there are minimum setbacks, minimum lot widths, and minimum lot areas that
Never
all need to be
happened from that
maintained.
place right there, you wouldn't have enough room. Catherine? Ann? Okay. Okay, so how would council like to move forward with this?
I have one other
Okay,
question.
Randy?
Maybe it's kind of a long shot. I think we're all trying to, come up with possibilities, if there are any other. This more south of where they're requesting the vacation, in that portion of the alley, could it ever be a possibility in the future for there to be a vacation request for that entire portion to then become a 20-foot wide vacated
Well,
portion?
you still run into the property right here, which is gonna be problematic for you as well, Randy. You see that line right there?
Is your question, could there be an additional 4-foot dedication to allow for a 20-foot fire access?
Right.
There's always a potential that the adjoining property owner could purchase or obtain another 4 feet.
Right. That's what I'm asking.
And then it would all depend how they were going to configure it, what the access was, so on and so forth.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Mayor, since the existing right-of-way does not meet fire code at this point, and another foot taken off of it doesn't make any difference, I guess I would have to move that we approve the vacation request by adoption of the draft ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that the ordinance be read by title and published by summary.
Second, with just the correction in the ordinance that, is it west or east? Because I heard
It's
them.
west. It is
Okay, so in the ordinance it says east, I think.
Okay, we got a motion by Jim and a second by Catherine to approve the vacation required by the adoption of the draft ordinance under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and the ordinance be read by title and published by summary, as long as it's on the west, and I'll take a look at that ordinance.
Page
We'll
10.
start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Hi.
Okay, the vacation is granted. Let me read this ordinance. This is ordinance number 2018-1. An ordinance of the City of Moscow, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the vacation of a portion of the public alley right-of-way within the City of Moscow legally described in Section 1 of this ordinance, providing that the title be said vacated right-of-way shall vest with the owners of the property as specified in Section 3 of this ordinance, and providing that this ordinance shall be in full force and effect from and after passage, approval, and publication according to law.